Alexander Hamilton has experienced a revival of popularity in recent years. From biographies to hit Broadway musicals, Hamilton is making his mark and reminding modern day Americans of Revolutionary War history. Or is he? From a musical full of catchy tunes and memorable lines, the author and composer Lin Manuel Miranda has pointed out a glaring issue right in the lyrics to the song. Who tells your story? Washington wisely shares this point with Hamilton early on in their relationship as portrayed in the musical. And who really knows if Washington ever said this to Hamilton, but it should be a word of advice for historians as well as they approach historical figures of the past. When considering historical analysis, it is important to remember that an unbiased approach is the only accurate perspective. Although a purely unbiased individual does not exist, every effort should be made to view the past through a lens of truth seeking, leaving aside agendas and political persuasions. This presentation will attempt to expose historical inaccuracies with regards to Alexander Hamilton's personal position on slavery, immigration, and elitism in America. The accuracy of Hamilton the musical has been called into question by many historians, ranging from Ms. Gordon Reed to David Waldstreicher, a historian at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. There are plenty of small historical discrepancies added in order to make the story more compelling or interesting. Simple changes, such as Angelica Schuyler being married when Hamilton first met her, or the fictitious meetings between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, intended to make Burr's betrayal all the more devastating, can be overlooked for the sake of narrative. More drastic historical inaccuracies, such as Hamilton's pride in his immigrant status or Jefferson's apparent dislike of immigrants, go much farther in damaging an accurate historical representation of these men, who should all be remembered as great for their role in producing the United States of America. The numerous historical discrepancies from Hamilton's mother's character to the speed and success of his military and legal career are not issues which change the trajectory of history. Yet they do work to subtly establish Hamilton as a fighter and lay the foundation for his good character, while undercutting Jefferson as a lazy man spending time in France while Hamilton and others created America with their blood. Alexander Hamilton is sometimes called the forgotten founding father, and perhaps this is what makes his history so vulnerable to misrepresentation and miscommunications. Heather S. Nathans, a drama professor at Tufts University, has applied her knowledge of drama history to the ever changing understanding of historical figures such as Alexander Hamilton. Nathans traces the use of Hamilton in plays back to the early 19th century and follows the use of Hamilton as a figure fitted to political leaning of each time period. Nathans recognizes the inconsistency with facts of Hamilton's portrayal as a defender of slaves. This portrayal as a defender of the people and advocate for the immigrant has a historical power all its own, as it becomes embedded in the American story as a whole. The true picture of Hamilton's beliefs and actions become more and more of a shadow of the character presented on stage. Nathans believes that the unconventional way in which Lin Manuel Miranda approaches and presents slavery in the Broadway musical actually helps in allowing for a new vantage point of slavery during the Revolutionary War period. But this viewpoint was not necessarily shared by Hamilton. Joan B. Freeman agrees that Hamilton was not the abolitionist he is made out to be in the musical. Yet she also discourages the idea of making Hamilton into a folk hero. These opinions that Hamilton lacked an interest in the livelihood of blacks during the Revolutionary period fail to consider his support for utilizing black slaves as soldiers and allowing them their freedom in return. This was not simply to take advantage of the numerical benefit that this would have to the rebel cause, but also because, as he states in a letter to John Jay, he believed it would have a good influence upon those who remain by opening a door to their emancipation. So while the musical may have spotlighted Hamilton as an abolitionist, his ambition often squashed his opportunity to make sweeping changes on this issue. According to Ankit Ball, graduate of Columbian College, Hamilton did detest slavery, but if this happened to conflict with the issue of property rights, the promotion of American interests, or his famously grandiose personal ambition, his opposition to slavery was secondary to these concerns. Another example of conflict between what is portrayed on stage and the realities of Hamilton's life can be seen in the fact that the Whiskey Rebellion of 1791 to 1794 is practically ignored in the Hamilton musical. The lyrics originally of the song One Last Time went one more step to indicate that Jefferson was responsible for stirring up the violent reactions of those facing tax evasion punishments. While it is true that Jefferson repealed the whiskey tax when he became president, there is little to no evidence that he incited the rebellion, even if he did support the right to riot. This event simply does not fit with the narrative hoped to be encouraging of a man of the people fighting for the poor, destitute immigrants. The Whiskey Rebellion itself was in direct response to the tax imposed on whiskey by the newly established Hamilton economic system for America. Hamilton had long had the intention of taxing alcohol, as it was mentioned as early as the 12th Federalist paper as a prime income producer for the new nation. Hamilton's arguments before Congress for the taxation of spirits was as confusing as any other part of Hamilton's history. He simultaneously argued for the taxing of spirits because it was a luxury item, while stating that it was a cheap drink which made the laboring class suffer. His entire stand on the subject is one of contradictions. This draws into question another set of lyrics by Lin-Manuel Miranda. If you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? This phrase is being taken up and used as a banner for groups all over the United States who fail to understand accurate history behind Hamilton, which continues to show that Hamilton did not stand up against slavery. He did not stand up for those in poverty, as many are falsely believing. Rather, he purposefully imposed taxes directly on a poor man's drink. At the same time, Hamilton urges the military to move against the rebellion going on in western Pennsylvania. This is an example of the early stages of Hamilton's anti-immigration policy, although it was potentially not intentional to direct this type of taxation with extreme consequences for non-payment at immigrants. This tax on whiskey nonetheless directly affected the cash-poor, heavy whiskey-drinking Scots-Irish immigrants of western Pennsylvania. In turn, it also brought the military face to face with the poorest of American citizens to put down their rebellion. Economic historian Philip W. Magness, who received his PhD at George Mason University, observes the conundrum which is presented in Lin-Manuel's Hamilton on Broadway stage and the historical figure who only slightly resemble each other in economic and foreign policy. In the chapter entitled Hamilton and Haiti by Daniel G. Lang, an in-depth look at Hamilton's reaction to the start of the French Revolution is explored. This particular situation was notable because there is a misunderstanding that Hamilton simply didn't want to support the French after they had assisted America in the Revolutionary War. But Hamilton's argument was one of details and not inaccurate. This, however, does not dismiss the fact that he was in support of some level of American isolationism. Hamilton had more grand long term ideals than some other founding fathers, who, although idealists like Jefferson, didn't consider the logistics to accomplish their ideas. Hamilton's long term vision included America gaining glory and honor on the world stage, while at the same time enabling other countries to observe balance and freedom in America. Hamilton's concept of America vindicating the honor of the human race harkens back to another idealistic place called Camelot. America, Hamilton thought, should be first among equals. The chapter about Haiti shows just one instance of Hamilton's struggle to define his ideals. Ham- Hamilton's ideas seem difficult to define because they shift so much. He was not always such an anti immigration isolationist with nationalistic tendencies. In fact, in his report on the subject of manufacturers in 1791, he was encouraging of drawing foreign born artists and others to America in order to boost the goods America could offer. Magnus believes that Hamilton's stance concerning immigrants changed following the Whiskey Rebellion. Perhaps this event, which was in many ways in a direct opposition to Hamilton's work by immigrants of Western Pennsylvania, caused Hamilton to take political and economic issues personally. This change in perspective for Hamilton would directly contribute to his resistance to helping in the French Revolution and his stand for the revolution in Haiti, which was not a priority until it helped balance the power of France and England. This dislike of foreign born individuals came into evidence even more following the work by William Findlay, who made an effort to reduce the travel requirements for tax evaders by allowing court sessions outside of Philadelphia. Magnus brings to light specific aspects of history which show Hamilton's aggressive opposition to foreign influence, most especially his insults of immigrant born politicians such as Findlay and Gallatin when they worked on behalf of those affected by the whiskey tax. While the goal of this work is not to discredit the Broadway production as being false, it is important to set history straight by allowing for a more clear understanding of the time period. It is interesting to note that the pro immigrant stance, which is attributed to Hamilton in the musical, was much more in line with Jefferson's position on immigration during the period following the Revolutionary War. Although the musical hopes to encourage a more accepting and modern progressive mindset for immigration and support for organizations such as Black Lives Matter, who have utilized this idealized portrayal of Hamilton, this pro immigration stance is diametrically opposed to the position Hamilton took in real life on these issues. Hamilton's beliefs clearly had an effect on the political environment of his day, and modern Americans are attempting to utilize Hamilton as a spokesman for their progressive movement. But are their ideals in line with his? The Alien and Sedition Acts had several parts which were directed at new immigrants. New powers would be established to allow for easier deportation of foreigners. Another major component was the issue of voting. New immigrants originally only needed to reside in the United States for 5 years. These new laws made the required residence within the country 14 years. The Sedition Act went so far as to deny Americans the right to oppose any measure of the government, and also refused the right of Americans to write, print, utter, or publish any false, scandalous, and malicious writing. This caused issues immediately for newspapers across the country who had been accustomed to speaking their mind. Interestingly, Alexander Hamilton would have been in a lot of trouble with the government had he immigrated a few decades later. As it was, he had immigrated in 1755 to America. He had also actively participated in rebellion against the British government and had written strongly against different governing opinions. The line sung by Aaron Burr, "I'll wait here and see which way the wind blows," seems to be much more fitting for Hamilton, who simply shifted his position as events changed and as the advantage favored a different outlook. In the end, it was Jefferson who, coming into office of president in 1800, repealed the acts put into place by John Adams, and as Hamilton moved from the center of public view, his ideas on restricted immigration were, for a time, put away from the American political environment. The history of Alexander Hamilton is one which is being constantly reinvented. This reinvention has not been done by the man himself, but by those who have come after and hoped to use his persona in such a way as to push their own personal or political agendas. Hamilton has been the subject of a number of popular books and on stage in plays dating back to the early 19th century. Although he has been the central character of these public histories, they seem to focus on a myth instead of the man. This research has shown Hamilton's action with regard to the Whiskey Rebellion period and the Alien and Sedition Acts are not in line with those portrayed in the musical. By reading Hamilton's writings about these topics and his relationships with others during this period, it is seen that his pro immigrant stance was created for dramatic purposes. Misinformation for the purpose of mainstreaming a less than popular idea is not a new invention and should be considered cautiously, with careful attention paid to Hamilton's own words. Hamilton continues to be an enigmatic persona, in large part due to the constant reinterpretation of his character. His own confusing stances added to this mysterious, vague concept of his character. Yet a clear understanding of his position on immigration and foreign influence is seen in his writings and his actions on the Whiskey Rebellion and the Alien Sedition Acts.